Thanks for agreeing to talk to me today, Graham. I'd like to start from the beginning. Please correct me if any of my facts are wrong, but I read that you started working for William Hill 1972 as a board marker and progressed from there.
Yeah.
Is that correct? And how did you get involved with betting shops in the first place?
That's absolutely correct. At the time, I was working for my father as a navvy on his building site. He was a foreman on a building site. My dad was a master bricklayer. I can't put one brick on top of another. I was out of work from my previous job on the local newspaper. And I having been out in the wilds of northwest London in Hendon, lifting every breeze block on this building site, I'd had enough of that. I really had. It was the middle of November. It was cold, it was wet, and I think this was part of my dad's master plan. And I spotted an advert in our local paper for a board marker in a William Hill betting shop in St Anne's Road, Harrow. And I went for the interview, got the job, I think basically because I could tell the difference between 6-4 against and 6-4 on. Handed my dad the donkey jacket, and my new employment began March 1972, yeah.
So were you a punter then? Were you actually involved with betting?
I liked a small wager. I'd had some bookmaking experience when I was at school. I was almost expelled for running a book on the FA Amateur Cup, in which my local team, which I still support today, Wealdstone, had reached the final, where they played Hendon in the final and won. Fortunately for me, my book was confiscated before the match could be played, and therefore any punter that couldn't produce proof that they'd had a bet was unable to collect. So that saved me from bankruptcy, and probably that's what saved me from expulsion as well. I think the deputy headmaster who rumbled me, I think he'd backed Hendon.
So you moved through the ranks to manager, but then it's a fair jump from manager to becoming PR guru. How did that come about?
Yeah, I really enjoyed being a board marker, and it's a shame that job doesn't exist any longer. I think there may well be one or two around the country. Enjoyed it, was pretty quickly put onto a settling course though. In those days you could do that very quickly. And I was picking up how to run a shop just by being in it, and I came into work one morning as a settler. I was in a shop round the corner from the other shop in Harrow, which the company had at the time, and the manager in the shop that I was working in said to me, "You better go round and manage the shop round the corner." And I said, "Why is that? What's the matter with John? Is he ill?" "No," he said, "he's vanished, and so have the contents of the safe. I don't think we're likely to see either again," he said. So I went round there, and I was sort of by default then the manager. And another job I really enjoyed, great job running a betting shop, but I'd always wanted to be a journalist. That was my background, and after a couple of years running the betting shop, I saw an advert in the Sporting Life for somebody to work in William Hill's advertising and press office as such department. They didn't really have a department called public relations in those days. I applied for the job. I think I had to write to the Sporting Life to apply for the job. Went for an interview with, bemusingly enough, the managing director of the company at the time, Sam Burns. I had no idea what he was doing interviews for a job like that, and sat in front of him. He had my CV in front of him, looked at it, said, "There's a mistake here. It says you already work for us." He said, "That's a bit previous." I said, "Yes, I do. I run one of the William Hill betting shops." He said, "Well, in that case, I suppose I better offer you the job." So that was it. I'd got the job in the advertising department, as it then was in there within a week or so. At the time, the main essence of the job was partly to take care of the day's advertisements in the Sporting Life and the Sporting Chronicle, also to give out the latest horse race betting information to those papers, contact trainers to ask them about their plans for the horses, that sort of thing. With my own journalistic background at that point, I started to ask why we only worried about horse racing publicity when there were a lot of newspapers out there who I thought would be willing to write about bookmaking and betting, given the right stories to do so. And I was basically told, "Well, if you think that, you better get on with it." And so I did.
So you've been given carte blanche to pretty much do what you want by the sound of it. So what was your first move?
Well, my first move was to try and compete with Ron Pollard, who at the time was Ladbrokes PR man, and he'd created a little niche market for himself betting on Miss World and the weather, which was getting some coverage. And I thought, if he can do that, why can't we do that? And I thought, if you're going to try and compete with somebody, copying is not enough. You've got to improve on what they're offering. So in terms of the weather, I went to the Met Office and said, if we asked you to confirm for us whether it snowed at any time during 24 hours of Christmas Day anywhere in the country, could you do that? And they said yes, they could, because at that time Ladbrokes' offering was that it had to actually be snowing at midday on the roof of the London Weather Centre for them to pay out on a white Christmas. So immediately we were able to enhance the offer that they had, and so we did that. And the other thing that he was doing, as I said, there was the Miss World competition. There was no reason why we couldn't get involved with that as well. In those days, it wasn't politically incorrect to bet on the outcome of Miss World. I don't think many companies bet on it now, although some still do. And then basically, my plan was to scan the tabloid newspapers, see what they were writing about, see if there's a bet that could be attached to it, and if there was, get it out there. And also to look for once at letters which came into the company, which previously were being thrown away from people who were saying, well, can I have a bet on my kid to grow up to play football for England, whatever it may be. And so we started to take them. A, it was money coming into the company. B, it was a story to give to, if only the local paper, for that child to win Wimbledon or to win a cap for England, whatever it may be. And then these things started to take off, and eventually the weather expanded into betting on whether and when it would stop and start raining in London, those sort of things. 1976, if you probably don't remember, being much too young. We had a scorching summer. We were able to bet on when it would start raining again in London, which was almost unprecedented. And then 2 years later, 78, we had a stinker of a summer, and we could bet on when it would stop raining. So the weather has been, until these days, just an unquenchable opportunity for people to bet on. And even bookmakers don't get accused of fixing the weather.
So you soon ventured away from the weather. One of your most famous ones, a lot of people will be too young, unfortunately I'm not, Who Shot J.R.
Absolutely, and I can't take all the credit for that. That was my wife, because I didn't even watch Dallas, and she was watching this programme at home one day and then mooching around the place saying, well, it could be him who does it, it could be her who does it, it could be them who do it. I said, what are you talking about? What's going on? She said, well, this character, J.R. Ewing, the hated villain of the piece, is going to be assassinated at some stage, and nobody's going to be able to find out who did it. And I said, well, why won't they be able to? And she said, well, I believe it's going to happen right at the end of the series, and we're not going to find out until the next series starts. I thought, well, it might be interesting, but surely that's going to be scripted. Probably not a lot we can do there. I then got a call from a guy called Richard Moore, if I'm not doing him wrong, from the Sunday Mirror, who said to me, listen, any possibility that you could open a book on Who Shot J.R? I said, well, you as well, is it? You and my wife watch this programme. She said, not only. I said, it's the biggest news in television at the moment. I said, okay. He said, I'll guarantee you a centre spread in the Sunday Mirror with all your odds in if you'll do me some prices. And I said, surely there's got to be a problem. People will know who's going to have done it. It's TV, it's going to be scripted. He said, listen, it's the end of the series. They don't start filming the next series for another 3 months or so. Nobody's even signed contracts to be in the next series. Who knows who's going to be in it that it could be. So he said, I guarantee to you, at least at the moment, nobody knows the answer. I went to see my one above my boss, because my boss just laughed at me when I suggested it to him. He said, you'll get us all the sack, it'll cost a fortune. Went to see the director who looked after our department. He sat down, he said, no, impossible. I went to see him again. Eventually got to the point where he said, okay, look, this is it. He said, you can do it. He said, if it works, it was my idea. If it doesn't work, you're out. Well, I thought that was the best deal I was going to get, so I took it, and we did it, and it just proved sensationally popular. And we ended up, when the new series began in this country, it was enormous news. But even when they showed the edition in which JR actually was shot, I think that ended just as the BBC News was starting, and it was one of the lead items on the BBC News that JR had been shot, and they put up our odds. I mean, how could you get coverage on BBC News of odds on a tabloid programme? You couldn't do it today.
And who did shoot JR?
Kristen, I think her name was.
Was it a Skinner?
She was second or third favourite. There were some people, I genuinely believe that never got out generally. There were a few people who had slightly larger bets than you might have expected for no apparent reason. But we took genuinely, this is in, what was it, 1979, 80, something like that. We took £250,000. That was serious money on a, you know, on a bet like that, and we paid out pretty much £250,000. So it was profit neutral, I think, as far as the company was concerned. But in terms of the free PR we got, you just could not have bought that. It's just impossible to buy that. And I should add, in light of things that happened today, we bought goodwill by doing that. People really enjoyed it. It was great. Everybody was speculating on it, and for us to be able to put odds on it gave people another way of looking at it. Everybody was saying, well, I think it's so and so because, and then somebody else would say, well, yeah, but the bookies don't think it could be possibly them. You can have 50 to 1 about him or her. So, you know, it brought a new angle to it, and there was, at the time, I can recall, no criticism of us doing it.
So that was obviously one of your spectacular successes. Were there any that really bombed or that you got tucked up on?
Oh, there's a lot. I think, you know, you sort of throw a lot of things out there, and some get picked up and some don't, and of course you very quickly forget the ones that you've thrown out there. I do remember one or two that cost us money for various reasons. You probably have to buy my autobiography for that when and if it ever comes out. But yes, they don't all work, and you shouldn't think they do, because otherwise you very soon be disabused of that fact. So of every 5 or 10 stories that you might put out, you'd be more than happy if one of them got picked up by a national paper. That in itself is a brilliant success rate.
So you are now, in hindsight, acknowledged as being an innovator in that sort of market. Do you think the betting industry appreciated it at the time?
Our rivals didn't, for sure. They didn't like it, and a number of them made it obvious that they didn't like it. And I suspect, basically, because we were getting, it was before they thought, well, perhaps we should do that as well. And in the light of what Ron Pollard had done, particularly for Ladbrokes, they should have kicked on. They didn't. When Ron retired, it was as though those sort of markets retired with him. Also, they thought nobody else would be able to do them for them, and they did have one or two good operators subsequent to that. But yeah, I think, as I say, it resulted in not only myself but the other people that work for bookmaking companies appearing on fairly mainstream television on quite a regular basis, being asked about their opinions on things and putting odds on them. And at the time, it certainly softened the image of the industry.
Politics was another big thing, if I've read my stuff correctly, for bets and things.
Yeah, politics again was one of Ron Pollard's specialities. Ron Pollard, of course, used to work for William Hill before he worked for Ladbrokes. And I think Ron took his idea for betting on politics to Ladbrokes because William Hill himself was very anti betting on politics. He thought it might influence people to vote in a different way for some reason. I think it was an illogical argument. And there was a famous, at the time, radio debate between William Hill himself and Cyril Steen at Ladbrokes, the managing director of Ladbrokes at the time. And Cyril was all in favour of betting on it, and William was trying to convince people that it was a bad idea to do it, and that didn't do the company any good. Now, William sadly had died a year or two before I joined the company, and so that his influence was still around, but it wasn't as strong. And Ladbrokes we were by that point taking bets on general elections and stuff, but not doing much else. And I had a bit of an interest in politics, but which I decided to make a bigger interest because it drove me mad seeing the media writing about Ladbrokes political odds. I thought, well, if they're doing it, we should be doing that and promoting it. And so we started to do that. And then it was around about the sort of time that my friend Screaming Lord Sutch came along and started the official Monster Raving Loony Party, and with whom we teamed up to sort of give an additional angle to political betting and to promote through. We actually ended up sponsoring the Loony Party. But political betting, even in those days, was a big deal. You know, you could seriously take 5-figure bets on the outcome, particularly of the American election. We used to have a lot of Americans who couldn't, as they can not at this moment, bet on their own election in their own country. And we would have people literally flying over to this country on Concorde to bring money over to bet on the outcome of the US election, and we took some serious bets there. I did get a phone call once from a guy in Texas, and I won't try and reproduce his Texan drawl, but he had the archetypal one, in which he told me initially he would like to have a small bet on the outcome of one of the US elections. So I said, how small? He said, oh, only $3 million. I said, okay, we probably wouldn't call that small, and probably we think that's quite a lot of money for one person. And he said to me, well, hell no, man. He said, it ain't all for me. He says, there's three of us. But it was still a bit too rich for the size of our book. You know, although we were taking some substantial bets, we couldn't handle a $3 million bet.
And did he get it right? Do you remember?
I guess he did, yeah, because most of the punters did get the American elections right. Most of the punters got most of the elections right up until relatively recently, didn't they? When it all started to go a bit pear-shaped.
Well, another of your good publicity stunts was Wogan's Winner. I think Terry Wogan used to give a tip out every day.
He did.
And that sort of caught fire. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I won't claim any credit for that at all. I think that was something that the racing industry got itself together to suggest initially, either to the BBC or the producers of the Wogan show. But for whatever reason, we ended up sort of semi-sponsoring it. It wouldn't have been called sponsorship in those days. But certainly you made a point of finding out what his selections were and highlighting it in the shops and everything, and encouraging people to get involved, because you were pretty sure that if it was a human being making the predictions, they were unlikely to be too successful in the long term. So we encouraged people to get involved as much as they could. And then we would feed back the stories of the people that did to the show, and one or two of the anonymous punters, as they were, who would turn up and just say, I want to back Wogan's Winner, Wogan's Wager at some time, I think it may have been called. And they would go through their little spell of being very successful, at which point, of course, we would slightly hype up the story and suggest that if they predicted another winner in the next day or two, we were likely to go out of business. Didn't quite happen that way, but yeah, they had some punters that were, and of course, as then, you were anonymous when you went into betting shops, so people were literally coming in with bags full of money and saying, just stick it on Wogan's Wager. Another thing that you can't see happening today.
Right, so hand on heart, can you tell me that they really did used to walk in and have suitcases full of money on?
I can tell you hand on heart that in my 45 years working for William Hill, I only ever slightly invented one story, and that was absolutely nothing to do with anybody coming in and having a bet. And I never ever, we never had to make up stories about the level of bets that we'd taken, because we'd taken the bets. I mean, the most famous example of that, I think, was a £500,000 bet on Big Bucks, which people still to this day do not believe we took. We did. I mean, what more can I tell people? We did. Why would we have to make them up? People do have bets. Sometimes we can tell you who they are. Sometimes we can't tell you who they are, because they don't want us to tell you who they are. But I never made any of those up. They were always true.